Please welcome Emmy-winning showrunner of Veep, David Mandel, and writer, producer, actor from The League and Veep, Paul Scheer.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, this is going to be a fun night. I know you know a little bit about it, but we're going to be talking about how people got started, who mentored them. And I have to say, Dave, like your career...
Thank you for mentoring me, Paul.
You know, you learned a lot.
No, really, everything I know, this man. So thank you. That's why I brought you out here.
And I'm glad to be here to talk about all the experience I gave Dave. You have like the best comedy career like that you can look at. It's
Television. My movie work is horrific.
We'll focus on TV, right? So you
Thank you. God bless.
From Saturday Night Live to Seinfeld to Curb, and now you're showrunning Veep. These are all like seminal comedy shows. And anyone who's ever worked in comedy knows that it's a kind of a scary space to get into, and you can kind of be eaten alive. And you've kind of worked at the hardest places and only come out seemingly stronger for it.
Well, but no. No, I mean, the good news is, I was always a fan of every place I've ever been. I guess I was really lucky enough to be a huge fan of the shows.
Right.
Most of those shows were things I kind of joined in process. So that's definitely sort of a pattern, if you will,
right.
in my career. I'm joining these things that I was already just a huge fan of. And yet, despite that, I guess I never went into it worrying like, how am I going to do it? Which,
right.
I don't know, maybe it was just stupid.
Well, no, but because I think, but you also come from this background. Like, you graduated Harvard. You were in the prestigious Harvard Lampoon. It was the who's who of comedy has come out of the Harvard Lampoon, and so I also feel like that gives you a little bit of not an ego, but you come in knowing you're good, right?
The thing, because obviously, look, if people are interested in this and you know about the Lampoon, I think people fall into two categories, which is, oh, another Lampoon guy, or at worst, kind of like, F you all you Lampoon guys,
right.
and sort of like, why do you think you should have jobs and whatnot? And what I've always tried to explain is, first of all, nobody should be just given a job, obviously. But what I will say is, being in the Lampoon was kind of like being in a writer's room for a couple of years
right.
before I was ever in a writer's room. And what I mean by that is, bad ideas, you got the shit kicked out of you, and you were sort of made fun of, and those ideas were sort of hung around your neck for 4 years later.
Right.
You remember that terrible joke, much like being in a writer's room. And so basically, I graduated from college having the experience of having learned I have to think of that other joke, the
right.
joke that not everyone can think of, for whether it was sort of like comedy alpha dog or just a fear of I don't want to be made fun of.
Yeah.
It sort of forced that next, I guess, level of thinking, and that's truly what the Lampoon. The Lampoon is not a mentor, but what it sort of produces within you.
Well,
yeah.
it takes you out of that place of writing by yourself,
yes,
and
very
puts
much
you
so.
in a thing where you have
It puts you with like-minded people. I'm sure it's like being in a great, group or something.
Yeah.
It puts you with like-minded people that you can do stuff with, but honestly, you do kick the shit out of each other in a good way. Yeah.
And then I also feel like, I come from the Upright Citizens Brigade, and we all kind of support each other and kind of move up. And one of your first jobs was like a Lampoon, like a Comedy Central, like a mockumentary.
Right, which if you, again, hate the Lampoon, this is not going to make you any happier, which was the Lampoon did a television project. This would have been, and again, now you're going to hate this also, this would have been between my junior and senior year.
Oh, wow.
It was a summer project.
That's a great,
yes,
that's a
exactly.
great internship.
The Lampoon had a history of doing magazine parodies, right. And this was their first TV parody. And it was called MTV Give Me Back My Life, a Harvard Lampoon parody.
Okay.
It was a fake 10th anniversary documentary of MTV, and it was made by the brand new Comedy Central, because there had been
right.
and the Comedy Channel.
Right.
And Time Warner was losing $10 million a year, and Viacom was losing $10 million a year. And they said, what if we made one place that we each lost only $5 million each? And just to really date myself, it was to get Comedy Central, you had to pay an extra $2.43
right, yes.
to your cable company. It wasn't just on the dial. So it was this show that nobody ever got to see. But I got down to Comedy Central in New York. A bunch of us wrote it up in Massachusetts, and then actually Jeff Schaffer and Alec Berg, who
right.
you know,
yes.
who were my also longtime writing partners, we went down to New York and they slept on my parents' floor, and we basically then produced the show. And what was truly incredible, just to go back to it, was we walked in the first day and in an office there at Comedy Central, acting as sort of a, I guess, comedy consigliere to the whole network, but this project also was Al Franken. And I worked with Al on that project, and then the following summer, he hosted comedy coverage of the Democratic and Republican conventions, brought me back for that, and then really, you know, definitely on the list of my, you know, mentors.
Well, you know, just talking about that, because Al Franken obviously had a huge impact on Saturday Night Live on camera. He was like one of those writers that was, you knew he was a writer and he was a performer. And when you come in and work with him, are you a little bit in awe of him?
I was fully in awe. I mean, I was that kid that was, you know, desperately trying to stay up on Saturday nights. They did in like 1979, they did this Saturday Night Live script book that looked like a real book of the script of the show. The Hill and Weingarten. I was a real comedy nerd too. Backstage at Saturday Night Live. So I knew all of the Franken and Davis stories, you know, how they got hired by Lorne, all that kind of stuff. And I knew their sketches, you know, like the Nixon, the Final Days sketch and whatnot. So to sort of meet him, not just befriend him, but then also, like, you know, work with him, and really just started, I mean, honestly, from day one, I mean, just start learning from him. It was kind of amazing.
Like, I mean, and that's the thing, I feel like, did you find that you were like-minded, or was it just sort of like, he just like, what do you think attracted the fact that he brought you to the next thing?
We definitely had just, I think, like a real similarity of like kind of comedy, just taste, I guess. We laughed at a lot of the same stuff. And one thing that Al did that I treasure to this day, and I think about it a lot, Al, there are shows where you hear like, it's really funny show and people are just miserable. It's like a comedy coal mine. You know, they're in there and they're just making themselves sick, working for like an hour on a line or something. And Al is certainly prepared to do the work, but Al laughed. He laughed at your stuff, his stuff. He was not afraid to laugh while he was working.
Right.
And it was a real sort of like, again, I was like that, but didn't know you could be like that. And, it just sort of opened things up in a really wonderful way.
Well, it makes it playful. I always am confused about, like, why is it miserable when you're making comedy? Is it not going to make good comedy when everyone's just staring at their laptops?
No, it's that thing of like, and it's just like, no. I mean, and by the way, I do that too sometimes. But the idea of laughing at it was wonderful. And he was really the first guy, more than anyone I'd ever been around, that was absolutely fearless. And I don't know, maybe we could sort of now sit here and go, his fearlessness with like that joke is sort of the trouble. But I guess I'll simply say to myself, anyone who knows Al really well, I keep hitting my mic, I'm sorry. Just like, he just was not afraid to make himself look terrible. You know, just there was a fearlessness as opposed to sort of mild milquetoast kind of like, I don't want to offend. Al was very happy to offend in a wonderful way.
I mean, he basically got fired from Saturday Night Live because he just ripped on the president of NBC.
Yeah, what's Fred Silverman?
But like just ripped on him continually, week after week. So when Lorne left, he was like, well, Al Franken should take over. And Fred Silverman's like, no. Like, but I mean, so like, but that's ballsy
Al wrote
to do.
A sketch once. He had been on, I don't know, I think it was like Spring Break. I don't think it aired. I'm trying to remember. I really don't think it aired. We definitely took it to dress. He had like some horrific experience in a rental car place with like budget rent-a-car. And so it was like, we did this sketch and it was like about, and he wrote it. I did not write it. It was him. It was like, Gudget rent-a-car. And the whole sort of joke was about the fact that clearly he had had a bad experience on his spring break and was using his position as a Saturday Night Live writer to basically shit on them. And it just, that was Al in a really wonderful way.
So Al brings you into Saturday Night Live now. And now Saturday Night Live is this other monster of, you know, you know, you go from one institution, which is Lampoon, to now this other hallowed hall, which is SNL. And what year are you in SNL?
I was there 92 to 95, which was sort of the tail end of like Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, and the rise of Sandler, Farley, Spade,
so
those
it's
guys.
A great time to kind of be
there.
And
92 was the election year, which was amazing. So you had Dana doing Ross Perot and Bush, and you had Phil doing Clinton. And actually, one of the big sketches Al and I wrote together was Clinton jogging into McDonald's.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
explaining Somalia as he
Yeah.
eats stuff, all,
Yeah.
you know, like warlords as he
Yeah.
eats the stuff.
wow.
And yeah, I mean, you know, I got to write that with him.
Yeah, and I feel like, and you know, SNL, I always hear the idea is like, you know, you live and die by the table read to a certain extent, and you know, and sort of you get that respect by those things. And so when you're at SNL, Jim Downey is a big figure there.
Jim Downey, longtime, I guess, first head writer, then producer, and all that kind of stuff. By the way, another Lampoon guy. Or is that yellow already?
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
know,
God, I'm sorry. I'll go as quick as I can. Jim Downey, and this is with no apology. You know, my other mentors, Al, Larry David, who maybe we'll get to, maybe we won't.
We'll get one line about Larry
Jim
David.
Downey is the funniest human being on the face of the earth. I don't know how else to say this. And I told this story in a book once, which is working with Jim Downey was like the way like chess masters play chess, where they like don't even need the board.
Right.
Like where they're like they're
yeah.
like 40 moves ahead. And I remember watching him. I always tell this story. I hope I haven't told it to all of these people. We were writing a sketch. John Malkovich was the host, and we did a sketch because he had kind of a funny-looking face in a good way, and he looked like one of the Menendez brothers. So we did him and Rob Schneider as the Menendez brothers. This is the early days of Court TV, and the idea was that their defense was that there were two heretofore other unknown Menendez brothers. Who had been locked in a basement and had done the killing, had done the murder. And what they would do is they were sitting like this, and they would go, where are these other Menendez brothers? We're going to go get them. And they would get up and leave the courtroom, and they would come back and switch sides and say, I'm Jose Jr. and Alfredo Menendez, and you're not just the other two Menendez brothers? No, we are not. And the whole time, the Chiron is just trying to keep up with this story. And I sat in there with Jim at like 4 in the morning, and I swear he was just dictating it. We weren't writing it.
Yeah.
He was just, it was like the sketch had been performed, and he was just like, if you watched it on TV and were telling someone how to write it down. And just so many of the things on like Saturday Night Live are because of Jim, and just styles of comedy.
Well,
too.
like I mean, and this may be hard to kind of distill, but what do you think you took from him?
There's a thing that Jim did, and I'm trying to just because I'm so nervous they're gonna like pull us off the stage. There's a sketch that I'm sure everybody knows, which is and I wasn't there for it, but it's a Jim Downey sketch that I've always loved. By the way, he's the Change Bank guy.
Right, yes, yes.
And I think he wrote that, and that's just pure Jim Downey, just the sort of the repetition of the nonsense.
Yeah.
He used to say about commercial parodies, it was non-existent problem, and then like not good solution.
Like a bad solution for a non-existent problem. Yeah.
But he did you guys know the Farley as the Chippendale dancer auditioning with Patrick Swayze. Yeah. The Jim Downey part of that is as they're doing it, it's the fact that as they're all watching Farley, how often they like are writing notes down and almost like really thinking about it. And then the incredibly long explanation of how much better looking Patrick Swayze is. And that's why. And it's that kind of a joke that like I sort of took forward with Jim Downey. From Jim Downey,
Well, and to kind of just move us forward a little.
Larry.
So, so now you go from Seinfeld, you go from Saturday Night Live to Seinfeld. Now, at what point did you join Seinfeld?
This would have been in '95, so this would have been what was Larry's last season. So
wow.
The season that ended with Susan dying.
Okay,
basically.
wow.
Yeah. So George gets engaged at the beginning of the season. So
that's
one with Larry, two without. Yeah.
Wow, so that's because at that point, again, Seinfeld is this juggernaut.
And I was
this
watching it, and again, lucky enough to be the fan of it too.
I know that the writer's room there is very different than any other writer's room.
It was honestly not a writer's room, which was also and that's something I have very much taken forward, which is, like Larry really taught me that individual writers on a show should have a responsibility for their episode, meaning on Seinfeld, in my episode, I was the one pitching the George story, the Jerry story, the Elaine story, as opposed to we're all in a room and it's your turn to write or your turn to write, even though I'm the one that put all 4 ideas in.
Exactly.
And so the writer would write his draft and in a perfect world bring that draft to table. Now it didn't always happen. Larry and Jerry definitely stepped in, but that was, they had not come up in the sort of network TV system.
Yeah.
Therefore, they had no reason to run a show that way. And to this day, I know that's how we do the show.
yeah.
Yeah. And structure. Larry taught me structure too.
Yeah, no, but yeah, no, and we're wrapping up. But it's like, but now, like, so when you're putting together a show, what are you like? So you're basically, do you let your writers?
Basically, I mean, Veep obviously has a little bit more of an ongoing narrative,
Right.
which obviously we sort of have to kind of stay on
Yeah.
top of a little bit, as opposed to just purely episodic, go off and write an idea. So usually we spend a couple of weeks sitting around just kind of talking about like overall concepts, and we kind of sort of start to lay them into piles of things. And then I really do try and sort of send that writer off who's really kind of hit a certain area more than, say, another writer, and then they're the ones that are really going off, taking it to outline, doing the draft, and then I'm working obviously with them, sometimes on top of them or simultaneously, but really it's me and that individual writer. Now, don't get me wrong, we will punch up in a room, we will try and make it funnier, but what we're trying not to do is create from scratch in a room with groupthink. The purpose of this method is that you're sending a writer off and basically trusting them to sort of outline this thing to whatever they think it should be, and then write it the way they think it should be. And I just think it's that's Larry. That's pure Larry. Yeah.
That's amazing, and that is unfortunately all the time that we
sorry,
have.
guys, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And here is a little video that I don't know what it's about, but it'll probably be pretty exciting.
So my father was my mentor. He had been a sound editor since the mid-50s. And so he had his own company, and I worked there over the summers and when I was in high school.
I started working for the WB network when it first started, and Jamie Kellner saw something in me that was more than just a freelance set rat, and he really took an interest and made sure that I started to understand story structure and understand how shows were put together and the budgets and so forth.
I was in hair school actually, and I got this opportunity to go work at Arena Stage in DC. And I was lucky enough to work with this gentleman named John Aitchison, who was a wig master there, and he taught me everything I needed to know in the business. It was amazing. It was like a free graduate program.
For me, that was Mr. Shoemaker. He was my math teacher at Jefferson High School, and he was the coolest. He helped me to find my way to college, and coming from South Central, applying for college and going to school, and he really took lunchtime to help me with my applications and really pushed me. And by the time I finished my junior year of high school, I'd finished all the math that LA Unified had to offer, and had started classes at UCLA. So it really was my entryway into going to college.